From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome back to our continued series entitled Empowering Women, Achieving Human Rights in the 21st Century. For you who have been watching our past programs, you know that we started out with an overview of that process, and now we're looking at some specific questions and issues. And on this particular week's program, we're going to talk about the right to self-determination for women, and we could not be more fortunate to have the two guests that we have. They're wonderful and have a great background to address this question. I welcome to the program, first of all, Ms. Ada Deer, who has recently been appointed by President Bill Clinton as Assistant United States Secretary of Interior for Indian Affairs, or she is the head of the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs. Our guest, Ms. Deer, comes to that post with a very distinguished and long background in public policy and in teaching. She is in that position well qualified to administer Indian affairs for the entire United States. Our guest was the first chairwoman of the Menominee people of Wisconsin and made major strides forward for her people during that term. Our guest also holds a BA in social work from the University of Wisconsin at Madison and has a master's in social work from Columbia University. In 1978, she was a fellow at the Harvard Institute of Politics, the John F. Kennedy School of Government. From 1977 to 1988, Ms. Deer was a senior lecturer at the School of Social Work and American Indian Studies program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she's on leave to serve the President of the United States in this capacity. Ms. Deer, it's a pleasure welcoming you to the program.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
And we're equally happy to have our second guest to share the discussion today, Ms. Anne Firth Murray. She too has a very distinguished background. She is from New Zealand. She was educated at the University of California and New York University in economics, political science, and public administration, with a focus on international health policy and women's reproductive health. Our guest resume is very long. It would take the program if we went through both of our guests, but I would like to add that from 1978 to the end of 1987, Ms. Murray directed the Environment and International Population Programs at the Hewlett Foundation in California. She is the co-founder and now the president of the Global Fund for Women, which is really receiving lots of attention around the world. It is an organization that is dedicated to providing funds internationally to seed, strengthen, and link groups committed to women's well-being and working for their full participation in society. Ms. Murray, welcome to the program. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our two regular panelists to question our guests on this important series that we're doing. Janelle Berg, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her, Steve Shink, who's the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Well, Ada, let's begin with you. You have been a role model and an inspiration to many people, including some of those in North Idaho and people around this region who might be watching this show. You've been a real role model and an inspiration to those people. You talked to the audience today at the Empowering Women Conference about the importance of role models. Can you share with us why you believe it's so important to have role models?
I'd like to remind everyone that we are all role models. We're all born into families. We have fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, aunties, and uncles, and a young child is influenced by the environment and the circle of people. And as I look at my life, and I invite everyone to look at their lives, who is the primary person to begin with? The mother, and then others. And I feel that we are all strongly interconnected one with another, first in our family unit, then in our community or tribal group, and then beyond. And so we all need to understand that our actions influence all the people around us at various degrees during our time. And I'm very happy that I've had some positive impact on some of the people, and I want to remind everyone, though, that we are all role models and influence makers in our circles.
And you also talked very eloquently about the necessity to serve, that being part of the community and service. Can you share with our audience a little bit about that, how you feel about serving the broader community?
Again, my mother impressed on me early in life, and all you mothers out there I know are aware of this, the influence that one has over the children. She told me that I was here on the planet to help people, not to indulge for my own personal pleasures. And I really believed her. And I met many other people, the teachers and counselors and friends over the years. And also, I grew up in a tribal community, and that's a very strong tribal value. And I think this is missing from too many people in the dominant society, that we are all interdependent. And let me say here that I think Chief Seattle spoke very well of our interconnectedness. He says that, and said that all are connected. All things are connected. And he was not only talking about people, he was talking about the animals, the plants, everything in the environment.
And today you talked with the people at the Empowering Women Conference about the Global Fund. Mm-hmm. So not only is it a problem in the United States, but it's an international problem, something that we're working on internationally. And your organization gives money to groups. Mm-hmm. Can you share with us some of the groups, because they're fascinating, what is going on elsewhere in the world and what the needs are?
I would like to do that, and I wonder, though, may I take the prerogative to just comment on something that Ada said? I was impressed, Ada, when you spoke, that your mother had told you the purpose for which you were on the earth. And I was so struck by that, because I thought so many people are questioning why we're here. What is the meaning of life? And I thought that we are very lucky people to have grown up somehow with the idea that there is a meaning in life, and that meaning, in fact, is to make the world a better place for other people. And many people are seeking meaning. I think we're lucky to have had that experience. So I just wanted to comment on it because it struck me very strongly. You asked about the Global Fund for Women. It is a 6.5-year-old organization that receives money from people who have it to give and gives it to women's groups around the world that are working on female human rights issues. I mentioned some examples today, and since they're in my mind still, let me comment on some of them. The sort of uniform issue that the women's groups that we are helping is female human rights. What do we mean by that? We certainly mean issues relating to reproductive rights, legal issues, the role of women in marriage, the legal aspects of women within the marriage, violence, many issues like that we might immediately think of as female human rights issues. Over the 6 years, we have been greatly informed by the women themselves that we have worked with. Literacy, access to literacy, which we would have considered a basic human need. Women in Africa in particular and other places are saying, no, this is a female human right, in that we have been denied access to literacy because we are women. So they see it as a basic human right, as opposed to a human need, which we might have described it. I could give other examples. Some of the groups that we've worked with, I think, that are particularly courageous are groups like Sisters in Islam, which is based in Malaysia, Women Living Under Muslim Law, that is based throughout Asia and elsewhere in Muslim countries, that are groups of women working to try to address the issue of how the Quran has been interpreted over time to essentially put women in a demeaned position. I consider their work very courageous. Another group, two groups really that I think of, is a group in Thailand called Agroforestry Basic Health and Cooperatives, is a group working in Nepal on very serious and complicated issues having to do with the trafficking of women between Nepal and India. Another group working on the Burmese-Thai border, concerned about trafficking of women, and particularly young girls, into the cities to be essentially used in the sex industry. So some of the groups that we're working with are taking on exceedingly painful and difficult issues, but they are finding that women coming together, addressing the issues, understanding the issues, and involving women that have been affected by these issues becomes a strong force in these countries. I could, of course, go on. We've made more than 500 grants to women's groups in 94 countries in the 6.5 years, and there are just hundreds of examples of courageous women addressing marvelous issues, difficult issues, but addressing it with strength.
Steve Sheen.
And if I can follow up for just a moment, it sounds like the Global Fund for Women funds activities that are more along the lines of help for women but I guess what the question that I really want to get to is for you as an economist, how much is the whole question of money power tied up in the question of the subjugation of women?
Well, I think, it's one issue. Money and power are almost inextricably linked. And one of the things that we've observed in hearing from literally about 2,000 women's groups that have written to us over the years, one of the major requests is for assistance to begin economic development programs. A sewing cooperative, a corn mill, a group of people who come together and think that they need to increase their incomes. We do not support pure economic development. Not that we don't think it's important, but many international agencies do support pure economic development. We're interested in economic autonomy, or the actual management and control of budgets and money by women. I won't say that pure economic development is not important, the development of that sewing cooperative, but it may only be the first step in women's empowerment. Women may, in other words, come together to increase their incomes so that they can send their sons to school. We're interested in the group that has gone a little further, increasing their incomes to send their daughters and their sons to school. A consciousness around the need to actually change the structure of society in their regions, and that is our particular interest. Other funders do other things. The issue of money, I feel, is one that women need to attend to, and I think particularly in this country, we're at the stage where women are doing this and can do it. It's part of our lives. It's basic to our lives, and yet we tend to put it aside as women. Money is the root of all evil. They're rich, but we're happy. Those kinds of attitudes that we shouldn't even take money. We shouldn't deal with people. We're doing the noble work, and the noble work is done on a shoestring, and the noble work is done by good people who may not have a lot of money. That, to me, is excluding a whole group of people, many of them women, who may be wealthy women, who themselves need to see themselves as part of an empowerment of women. Wealthy women who wish to use their resources in useful ways, in ways that will empower them. And I think we as women particularly have not wanted to face the issue of how do you get access to money, and when you have it, or if you already have it, or when you get it, how do you use it? And can we, it's a similar issue with technology, modern technology. There's a kind of worship of technology and a worship of money, and yet women have tended to allow that to move forward without taking real management of money and technology for the sake of mankind. I think we need to attend to the issue of money. I don't know if that responds to your question.
It does. Thank you.
It's been on my mind.
Allow me one more question. Ada, if I may turn to you. In his introduction, Tony talked about the question of self-determination for women. How is that linked in any way with the question of self-determination for the Indian people as a group?
Self-determination is the policy of the current administration. It was clearly enunciated by President Nixon in his 1970 presidential message on Indians, in which he said self-determination without termination. And if we look at the statistics, we can see that American Indians and Alaska Natives as a whole are at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder in this country. And American Indian and Alaska Native women are at the bottom of the bottom in terms of earning power and educational opportunities. So there is some linkage there. And what I want people to understand is that it's time now for all of us as a total society, as a total world, to look to the 21st century. And we all need to make opportunities available to those that have been shut out. We need to convert the resources that have been used in the wars of the world to help now in health, education, housing. And with just the cost of 2 missiles, the budget of the Bureau of Indian Affairs could be transformed, and individual lives of both men and women in the tribal communities would be greatly enhanced. And so one of the points that we all need to understand now is that it's important to develop the potential of all our people across this country, as well as much as possible across the world. And so it's important to look at the value systems of the society, to challenge these systems and to change them.
Ada, I want to proceed in that area. That's what we did. We indicated this was a program on self-determination. And when I hear that word, I also, in relation to this conference here, empowering. And certainly when individuals are empowered, whether we're talking about women or other communities in society that have by prejudice and bigotry and laws, been denied that access. My question, first of all, is in the case of, as you mentioned, within the Indian community and in the role of women in the economic situation, to help educate others to what we need to do. Could you tell us some sources? I know you, as a teacher like myself, you love to suggest to people that there are ways to do it, but I do have a book with you, and I want to lead into that and suggest that people become better informed.
Yes, we all need to become better informed. As a matter of fact, I want to challenge all the people in the audience to look at the textbooks in the high schools and the grade schools and the colleges, because we have been left out. Who do I mean by we? Women, people of color, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, American Indians. And yes, I do have an important book here called Indian Givers, How the Indians of the Americas Transformed the World, written by Dr. Jack Weatherford. It is an excellent book full of basic information, and let me tantalize you with just one fact. 60% of the world's foods were first cultivated by the Indians of the Americas here. We're talking about chilies, potatoes, chocolates. There have been many contributions that American Indians have made that have been ignored. And so we need all to do our homework, to read about the history of women, the history of all the groups in our society. Not only to read about it, to understand, to appreciate, to accept, and then to move forward together as partners into the 21st century. So this means more resources devoted to the education of women, for example, more resources devoted to improving some of the basic problems in our society of housing and other areas. Challenges to each of us.
Really well put, very eloquent. And along those same lines, take advantage of this opportunity to speak to people in Canada and the United States and talk about how would you both define and recommend that we move toward empowerment, in this case, of women?
Well, as you were speaking, it came to my mind to say that people who have been oppressed, and all of the groups that you've mentioned, I hope that I don't alienate people by saying we're really talking about everyone except white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, straight men. Because everybody else has essentially been oppressed in one way or another, but they haven't, really. They, good as you are, I'm looking at least one and a couple of them, I think that if we're going to make change, the people who indeed are oppressed will make it. Those for whom as a group, obviously there's a terrible generalization, but as a group, people who wish to maintain the status quo, who are going to benefit by the maintenance of the status quo, are not going to work very hard to change the status quo. So it's people who don't have a vested interest in the status quo who will make change. And I'm talking about structural change. We really need structural change. I do believe that people have to work within the systems. You're working within the system. I tend to be a little bit outside of the systems. One might say we need to work within the system and outside the system, but ultimately over time our goal has to be to change the structures that have oppressed people. The term has been coined, the dominator structure, a structure which always puts somebody over another, that always maintains that someone is under or over, or that we think entirely in terms of that status. We have to change our thinking around that, I think, and the people who will change it are those who have an interest in changing it, not the ones who don't have a vested interest in changing it. So I would say that. In terms of education of people and understanding more about these issues, and I think my special interest, of course, is women internationally, there is no country in the world and no area of activity where women have actually, where women do have equality with men. We're doing well in many areas, but that is simply true. There is not actual equality in any country or in any field, really. And so what to do about it? All of the things that Ada's talked about. encouragement, equal treatment. And I believe the kinds of things that I mentioned in a speech that I gave today, we need each one of us, in very, very personal terms, to begin being good to each other, treating each other equally. I'm very idealistic about this, but I think it begins with each individual person treating each other individual person equally and with compassion, with caring. Older people to younger, younger to older. All of the divisions that have occurred, we need to I think we need to be very conscious about it at every moment. And the thing, you turn me on, you wind me up.
That's fine.
I'd like to say one other thing. We never know what touches someone. We never know what touches someone. A moment, a statement, something that we've said or not said, a gesture, can make all the difference in a person's life. If we think back of our own lives, how something someone said has made a tremendous difference in the way we went, either negatively or positively. And I think we all, therefore, have to be terribly conscious, especially with young people, of course, that what we are saying and how we're saying it and how we treat each other, it can make an immense difference. Because although we seem to feel that we can't make a huge difference in the world, in fact, every moment is an opportunity, I think, to make a difference. So I think we all have a very important role to play. I think it fits with what you were saying about being a role model or whatever.
Thank you.
And I would like to say that each person can make a difference.
Yes.
And everyone needs to try.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had time with each person, if each of you, I would see what your personal agendas are right now, and I'd help you develop a refinement of it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Janelle Bird.
This is so inspirational. Earlier today, we've talked about a couple of things. One is that no one is free until everyone is free. Mm-hmm. And along the same line, you talked, Anne, in your speech about the gentle man. Mm-hmm. Can you talk with our audience a little bit about what you meant about the gentle man and also about no one is free until everyone is free?
Well, what I really mean is a man who has worked at rejecting the idea that men have to fight or have be violent in there. I mean, we've raised boys to be kind of dominant in one way or another, and Riane Eisler has spoken about the connection between that dominant approach and the use of violence, the institutionalized use of violence, for example, in societies. Rape is a war crime. I mean, all these things are connected. But I'm talking about men who reject that, who do not want to be part of that. They want to be men, fully happy in their sexuality, however they want to express it. But rejecting that part that has been forced really on men. That's what I mean by gentle men.
And I would include them in the partnership.
And in fact, I think, as I mentioned when I spoke earlier, I think it's terribly important that women and other men be very, very encouraging and tremendously supportive of men who will stand up and take a stand against violence. And what do I mean by that? Perhaps it's a young boy who doesn't want to fight in the schoolyard. You know, he doesn't want to. He's not interested in fighting in the schoolyard. People have to support that boy. He's going to be called a wimp or something. I have to say that I think the tide is turning on this tremendously. I mean, we're seeing it in films and in many, many different ways. And one of the classic examples was this football player, a couple of weeks ago, who stayed with his wife when she gave birth. And he was going to be fined hundreds of thousands of dollars and all of that. And the coaches said, well, when I was there in his show, my wife said, honey, I've got a game to go to when my wife had a baby or something. Well, those coaches had to eat their words because the letters that came in were overwhelmingly supportive of this man having this fantastic experience of seeing his child born. And that I don't believe would have happened 10 years ago. People might have thought it, but they wouldn't have written the letters. But now they wrote the letters, and the coaches have to stand back and say, well, oops, when the people lead, the leaders will follow.
Ada, I know you're always looking forward, and what is it that you think from history that we can bring in? Because your people were here years before others arrived, what is it that you think we can learn from that history to bring, to take into the 21st century?
All of us need to know and understand history, and I'm remembering a quote from John F. Kennedy in a book a foreword to a book, in which he stated that before we can know where we are going in the future, we must know where we've been in the past, and it is essential to know and understand the history of the American Indian. And I feel that in our society, until all of us together have a full understanding and appreciation of all of our peoples, we won't be able to take our real place in the sun. Society is reluctant to do this, and so that's why I mentioned the need to do our homework, read books. We need to then take action, and I'm thinking what needs to be done. This is a women's conference, the empowerment of women. This country needs the ERA. Very few people even talk about the ERA anymore. But if the ERA would be passed, a lot of the barriers keeping women from full equality would come down, and it would be much easier. We that are in positions of leadership need to speak up and speak out and push the boundaries and stretch the minds of people, and this is what I've done in the past, and this is what I will continue to do in the future. Not only to understand history, and it's especially important to understand the history of the native peoples of this continent, but then to act on the injustices. There are many, many injustices that have occurred, and people tend to forget this. People do not, in some instances, want to recognize the treaties, but in the U.S. Constitution it states that treaties are the supreme law of the land. And they aren't dusty old documents way back when. They're living documents that are impacting the lives of people now. So we need to understand the past, and then we need to then correct the injustices, and this can be through laws, can be through policies, it can be also important through our own individual actions, and the list is endless what each of us can do.
May I mention something? The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination of All Kinds Against Women, CEDAW, C-E-D-A-W, is a UN convention that has been signed by some 90 countries and not the United States. Like the ERA, we haven't passed the ERA. We also haven't signed CEDAW, which is not perfect, but it is pretty much the best thing that's come along so far for women at the UN level.
At that point, I have to bring up from a conclusion. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I, on behalf of the panel and our staff, want to express a very deep appreciation to both of you. Have articulated in the most eloquent way this issue of dealing with self-determination, and thank you both very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our guests have been Ada Deer, who is the Assistant Secretary of Interior for Indian Affairs, or head of the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Anforth Murray, who is the President of the Global Fund for Women. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week when we will continue this series entitled Empowering Women, Achieving Human Rights in the 21st Century. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.